Hey guys, Happy New Year! Thought I'd kick off 2023 with another tier list by the data using information from YGeoscope.com and see what the top decks are on Dueling Book. You can always check out my earlier tier list videos on how the scores are calculated. And before we continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as always. Make sure to check out my links and discount codes below. Now, as always, here's the notable decks that YGeoscope still cannot identify, and some of these actually have a pretty good matchup against Tearlaments, like Naturia, Exo Sisters, Crystal Beast, and hopefully Kushtira will be able to get identified soon as well, since they will get more support in Photon Hypernova. Anyways, sadly, these decks will not be a part of the tier list as there's no data available for them. So starting with the tier list, no surprise, we have Tearlaments at the number 1 spot with by far the highest score and really deserves a separate tier on its own, but I'm just sticking with the current layout. Not only does it continue to make most of the YCS top cut representation, with the most recent one being the remote YCS, it has insane win percentage online at 61% and can just about do anything and continues to see success despite the number of different strategies available that are built specifically to combat Tearlaments. Then we have Spright, and if you saw my meta-analysis of the top ranked players that I posted a couple weeks ago, you'll see that there's actually a lot of top ranked players choosing to run Spright instead of Tearlaments. I'm personally on that train as well, as I've moved past playing tiers for now and enjoying the simplicity of Spright. The release of the Ninja Mosquito in Battles of Legend and Crystal Revenge is actually quite impactful in this deck because it's just a better Sky Cavalry, as not only does it offer you the Zeus line, but can just kill your opponent if you have enough bodies to declare attacks, and is an easy way to win even if you cannot out that big monster. Next we still have Floowandereeze to form the top 3 decks right now, which has not changed in a few months. No real new additions to this deck strategy aside from the additional Dimension Fissure that's available to them, I suppose. It's the best anti-meta strategy at the moment, so it is something you could pick up to combat Tearlaments as well as many other decks, but just keep in mind of its win condition being irrelevant in mirror matches and if that's something you're fine with when deciding to run the deck. Lastly, in this tier is Runic. Now originally I did not add Runic to the tier list videos because just Runic is pretty vague, as it could be pure stall Runic or just other Runic variants like Spright, Naturia, among many others. But I decided to ultimately put it in these tier list videos because it shows how popular the engine is and quite formidable in combination with a variety of completely different strategies. Their spells can pretty much do anything in terms of popping, negating, and the like, not to mention banishing a lot of your opponent's cards and really puts them on the clock. You do have to be able to think multiple turns ahead when piloting most Runic strategies, since you have to skip your battle phase. Aside from the pure stall kind, I guess there's not too much thinking in that one. So if you have the brains to do this, go for it. Next with tier 2, we are once again starting with Sword Soul. They recently got a new card announced, so their support is still there, and it seems to be a pretty fan favorite deck, and there's several high ranked players on Dueling Book running this strategy. It's obviously still a tough spot for Sword Soul, but being able to banish cards with their synchros is pretty nice, and its multiple pops with Blackout can also be very strong against Spright that relies on having their level 2s on board to pop off. Then we have Branded, which of course is another strategy that's mixed with a variety of different decks. Branded Despiot Bestial is the primary one at the moment, which plays a lot of Bestials of course to combat Tearlaments, but Branded Fusion is still pretty strong on its own as well. I'm personally dabbling with the Branded Cyber Dragon Bestial list, so stay tuned for that as well. Next we have Dark World, and in last month's meta tier list, I assumed that this was high because Structure decks had just come out, so there was probably a lot of hype and a lot of people wanting to try it out, but even a month later, looks like it's still played enough to get to this tier 2 spot, although as you can see from its win percentage at just 45%, it's not actually doing so well. Not the greatest time to be released, and with some of the decks starting to side droll again in the YCS topping list, that completely shuts off their strategy. Then we have Bestial Dragons, and you can check out my most recent deck profile for this strategy on my channel as well. Dragons have always been competitively viable, and now they seem to be using Silver Rocket to try to banish a card from the opponent's extra deck, which I assume is probably to banish Kick Kalos against Tearlaments, and some also play the Amorphar slot to prevent a special summoning as well. The Bestials go quite well with this strategy, so certainly a solid deck option to choose, as Konami will always continue to support dragons. Next we have Tri-Brigade, which along with the Illyrilisk stuff has also regained some popularity in play. What was once a clear tier 1 deck, it is still a solid strategy and has a good grind game, and can even search DD Crows, which is pretty nice in this format. Then we have Heroes, which seem to be the most fan favorite competitive strategy that's viable in today's game. They seem to continue to get more and more support every year or so, and while they lack an Omni Negate, they at least have some strong floodgates like Dark Claw or Plasma, and not to mention the recurring pops of DPE. Now onto the Rogue section, we start off with Dragoon Turbo decks. If you saw one of my Dueling Book deck profiles featuring Chain User, he's actually rated quite high with Dragoon Sub-Terror. Dragoon is actually pretty strong in this format, as it can be hard to out for a lot of decks, and if you summon it with Dark Magician and Red Eyes, then now you get those multiple pop and burns, which is quite huge, and can easily game Tearlament players if that resolves. Win percentage of 53% is quite solid, as when you have Dragoon plus Floodgates, it can be pretty hard to out. Then we still have Sky Striker running around, although with its continued struggles and wins, as demonstrated by the 41% win percentage. It recently got a new Link 2 that's announced, so Konami will definitely make more Striker support. The problem is a lot of times they don't end up being very good, but every now and then Striker comes back to being very solid, so I'm sure that phase is inevitable as well in the near future. Next we have Punk, so I don't know what I'm missing here, but let me know if there's been any recent indirect support that would cause Punk to jump up in this section like this. Had a solid 53% match win percentage as well, and I'm not really sure what their win condition is anymore. There's someone at my locals who exclusively plays Punk as well, so maybe I can do a profile sometime and get a better understanding of what they do. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you play this deck and want to share your thoughts on it. Then we have Madolche, and I recently did a profile with the one and only Ryan Yu and his Madolche strategy. It does have a lot of grave shuffling that can do, so technically it is built to combat Tearlaments, but from what I've heard from Ryan, I think it's still an uphill battle as Tearlaments are so strong. Still a favorite rogue strategy among many, and they do build up quite the board presence and can also OTK you rather easily. Next we have Dinosaurs, which is technically a mix of actual dinos and also Dinomorphia, as wide Geoscope seems to confuse the two. At least it's still making it as one of the top 20 decks played online. Cannot say the same about other rogue decks like Nisur or Mathmech that has seemed to die down for this month at least. Can break boards or can set up a pretty nice board if it's the combo variant, and at least you don't have to worry about people running Lancey anymore. Then we have the good old reliable Salamangreat. No new indirect support lately, but at least this deck has always been able to make Baguska or Beast Dweller, which are pretty strong against the top decks at the moment. Of course, the Grave Shufflers in Kaldo and Medora really destroy this deck, but at least it's a cheap budget option that you can still run at locals. Then an exciting new entry is Zodiac, popularized by the DB Grinder. This basically seems to be a shifter deck that aims to go second and break boards with the help of Zeus. It's been a while since we saw Zodiac in the meta ever since the ban of Trident, but looks like it's still making a small comeback and even had a decent 50% match win percentage in the last 7 days. Lastly in this tier is Altergeist. It's pretty interesting that this deck has also managed to see enough play even after all this time, and while its new direct support has not been so amazing, at least there's always going to be new traps announced that this deck can run. Lastly, in the other tier, we have Virtual World. I recently did a profile on my channel for this deck, and as it's a level 6 turbo deck, it can make something like Wallow, which is a quick effect to disrupt your opponent's tier fusions, and Shen Shen is a walking macrocosmos, so that's always nice as well. Sadly, this deck has always struggled for its brickiness, so I can see why so many players have moved on from running the deck. And lastly, we have Elitch. Surprised to see that he even made it to the tier list this time around, as the Bestials absolutely destroy this deck, and the Grave Shufflers kinda interrupt them as well. Sad to see how the Mighty has fallen, as this deck was in various tier 1 strategies since its release. While most people don't like Elitch decks, I do find it a bit unfortunate that so many strategies like this one have become completely unplayable due to the release of Bestials and or Shizu cards, so hopefully that gets remedied soon. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's meta tier list. Hope that was interesting. Make sure to subscribe to see these on a monthly basis, and I'll be providing a rogue tier list by the data next week. As always, a big thanks to my patrons Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bear Lord, Spooky Boogie, Stephen Phillips, and Chaz Blanks, as always for supporting the channel. You guys are awesome. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.